The discovery that some 800 babies had died at a former mother and baby home run by the nuns in Ireland, and that their bodies had been put in unmarked and horribly inappropriate graves, shocked the world.
It's a sewage tank. Why are there children buried in a sewage area?
The religious orders are back in the spotlight. The government has called an inquiry, the sixth into what went on behind convent walls.
They won't inquire properly because I know what the government are like.
The report last year into the Magdalene Laundries, run by the nuns, was a whitewash, say the survivors.
They took my life, they took my human rights, they took my hair, they took my clothes, they took my name, and they also took my daughter, which was the worst of all.
The survivors want the new inquiry to also look into their story, and for the nuns to be held to account.
All I wanted was, please, somebody to give me an apology for what happened to me.
Will this latest inquiry tell the whole truth of the suffering of those put in the care of the nuns? Survivors of a home run by the nuns for single mothers in County Westmeath gather for a reunion. They are the lucky ones. They survived.
There was thousands of babies born here. There was hundreds of them died, and I remember the nuns carrying down the little brown shoe boxes to bury the children. And when the workman buried those little babies, he put nails on the wall to represent each child he buried.
Now the government has announced yet another inquiry into the mother and baby homes. These survivors say they won't be fobbed off.
We have found our voice and we're not going to be silent anymore.
They're angry because they say earlier reports, like that into the Magdalene Laundries, failed to tell the full truth of what really went on in Ireland's religious institutions. Questions began to be asked when, back in the early 1990s, the nuns who owned the vast High Park convent in Dublin wanted to sell the land where now there's a car park. The problem was that the plot they wanted to sell, which back in 1993 looked like an empty green field, was in fact filled with the bodies of former laundry workers. I tracked down the gravedigger employed by the nuns to dig them up in County Kildare. He agreed to give his first television interview.
Well, the nuns were trying to sell the place, and it was big money, like. So they didn't want anyone to know what was going on. It was all hush-hush. We were supposed to tell no one about it.
The nuns told him there were 133 bodies buried in the plot.
When I said there was more bodies buried there, they said, no, there's only 133. We started digging then, where I thought there was. So we kept digging and digging till we dug out the whole lot, and we ended up with 22 more that we weren't.
So
we didn't even know they was there.
22 bodies that the nuns didn't even know were there.
Didn't even know they were there.
And he found something else inside the grave.
A lot of plaster of Paris, which was on their wrists, and their arms, their legs, their feet, their ankles. There were broken arms and broken legs as well. It seemed to me like. The women were too small, they were too frail for that kind of work.
There was shock at the story of unrecorded burials and corpses with broken limbs. People began to ask what had been going on in the laundries. The few pictures that exist give a rose-tinted view. No sign here of the crippling work described by survivors. Thousands of women and girls were sent to work unpaid to a network of laundries all over Ireland. They were sent by the state, by their parents, by local priests, and if they were orphans, by the nuns. Mary Merritt was born of a single mother in a mother and baby home and was sent to an orphanage which were run by nuns in Ireland for most of the last century. One day when she was 11, she was so hungry she took an apple from an orchard. She was sent to work in a laundry in Dublin.
They took me to High Park Convent and they left me there and they said, now you stay there until you learn to stop stealing.
And how long did that take?
I was 14 years there. I went there on the 7th of January 1947 and I came out of there in September 1960.
Did you ever ask why you were there for 14 years for stealing an apple?
Yes, I did ask them, and I asked, was I ever going to get out of here? Am I going to die here? Because some of the women had been there for 56 or 57 years, and I thought, am I going to be the same, and I'm going to have to die in this place? One of my jobs was to help to lay out the women when they died. I was happy to do it, because at least these women were getting out of the laundry and their suffering were over. Sue, that was my friend, Mary Breheny. She worked for the Magdalene Laundry for 56 years.
I moved on to Waterford, where I learned you didn't have to steal an apple to get sent to a laundry. So what do you remember as you walked down these corridors? Elizabeth Coppin had been abused by her stepfather and was sent to an orphanage run by the nuns. They took her out when she was 14 and put her to work in a laundry.
The first Magdalene Laundry I was in, it was a nightmare. You worked from 8 in the morning till 6 at night, every day except for Sunday and bank holidays. Oh my God. You know what? This brings back so much memories. It's changed and yet it's the same. We used to have to go to confession once a week here. The priest would sit in here and we would go in here to tell the sins that we never had. I mean, what sins would you commit anyway?
You didn't have time?
No, you wouldn't have time to sin. If anything, they were committing the sin against, they were torturing us. They were the sinners, not us. This is where we came every single day for Mass, the Magdalene women and girls. We had to come here, even if we were sick or not. I mean, you just had to.
As more such stories come to light, the more the Irish public demand to know how this catalogue of arbitrary detention and slave labour was allowed to go on until the last of the laundries closed in the 1990s. After all, the government was paying for women and children to be cared for in these institutions. It was when the United Nations Committee on Torture called for an investigation that the government here agreed to an inquiry, but with the narrow remit of looking into state involvement into the running of the Magdalene Laundries. When Senator McAleese brought out his report at the end of last year, there was widespread criticism. Survivors were astounded to read that the McAleese report decided to not make specific findings on the issue of living and working conditions in light of the small sample of women available, despite the harrowing testimony of many women who complain of ill treatment. Elizabeth told the inquiry she was put into a punishment cell at a laundry in Cork after wrongly being accused of stealing sweets.
I was in there for 3 days and 3 nights till they decided I'd learned my lesson for something I didn't do. But that was, again, it was all about mind games. It was just controlling you.
When Elizabeth tried to run away, she was sent to another laundry with an even stricter regime.
They shaved my head and I had to wear a uniform. So straight away your identity is taken because my name is changed, my hair is cut and I'm not wearing my own clothes. And I'm stuck in there and I have to answer to the name Enda, which is a man's name. So how do you cope with that at that age?
Why do you think they did that?
Just to dehumanise me, to make me feel nothing in society.
Mary also tried to escape. She broke a window and ran into the town, where she begged a priest to help her. He raped her.
I'd never been out in the world in my life. And I had no idea what was going on. I was crying my eyes out and I said, "You're hurting me." Then when he was finished, he said, "Now, this is between us. I'm going to give you 6pence," he said, "and this is between us," he said. "Don't tell anybody." I said, "I'm only trying to help you," he said.
The police took her back to the laundry. Mary says she also told Magdalene how the nuns didn't believe she'd been raped. They put her in the punishment cell for running away.
One of the nuns came down then and she cut my hair to the bone. And then I was taken up and I was made kneel in a room with all the women there, kneel down, kiss the floor and say, "Oh, sorry for what I did." And promise not to do it again, which I didn't promise, of course. But she said to me, "You have to," I said, "No, I'm not promising you anything," I said, "because I want to get out of here," I said, "and I might do it again."
Many girls and women interned in the laundries tried to run away. I went to Limerick to meet Gabrielle.
This is the wall I tried to escape from many times, but in those days they had glass all along the top, so there was no chance. So then in the end I remember falling off, and I've still actually got the scars to prove it.
Gabrielle was 17 when she was sent to the laundry here. Her mother asked the nuns to stop her running away with her boyfriend, and they obliged by imprisoning her.
This was the yard. It was kind of like an exercise yard. You know, you'd walk around, because that was the only exercise you got, really. And you'd just walk around for, I don't know how long, but that's like where we would do it. Yeah, it's the same as a prison. They worked the same system.
Gabrielle didn't do the laundry. She was put to unpaid work, making the famous Limerick lace now on display in the City Museum.
We would be making lace from 9 in the morning till 6 at night. And they would have the American market. They would have holiday makers, if you like, coming into the convent, looking at what we were doing, and they would place orders. And they would buy stuff. We mainly were selling collars, lace collars, handkerchiefs, all little things like that.
And it was a brisk business then?
It was, and they were making money on it. They say it wasn't commercial, but it was. But it was a very secret thing.
Which is odd, because the Magdalene report says that the data made available by the nuns suggested that the Magdalene Laundries were operated on a subsistence or close to break-even basis, rather than on a commercial or highly profitable basis. The nuns are famously secretive about money, but their old ledgers can turn up in the strangest places. A publican here in Limerick bought a job lot of old furniture from the laundry when it closed and found 4 ledgers dating back to the 1950s. Do you get many people asking to look at them?
I don't know.
Pages and pages of private individuals here, hundreds of them. And here are the bigger clients: colleges, churches, the Stella Restaurant, the Bedford Hotel, the Railway Hotel, and here the Limerick Lawn Tennis Club. There wasn't much going on in Limerick where the nuns weren't doing the washing for them. I found a more recent ledger from 1980 in a museum in Dublin. It's from the High Park Laundry where Mary worked. It reveals even bigger clients, including government contracts. We have here the airport, one of the country's main train stations, airlines, government departments like the Department of Fisheries. There are hotels, private individuals, convents, and seminaries. No wonder trade unions and commercial laundries complained at the time. They were competing against the nuns, whose overheads didn't include wages. They had free, forced labour. And for how long were the women forced to work? According to the McAleese report, the average or median duration of stay in the laundries was approximately 7 months. By comparing headstones with electoral rolls, Claire McGetterick discovered that for one 10-year period, most women at the High Park Laundry were there for a minimum of 8 years.
We've looked at electoral registers, for example, from 1954 to 64, and looking at High Park in particular, we've been able to show that at least 46% of these women from 1954 to 64 never got out. Also, you've got a woman in Limerick who spent 74 years. In 1911, we've got her there at 18 years of age. So, you know, again, it tells a completely different story to that of the McAleese report. And the way the figures are presented is frankly misleading and is not respectful of the lived experience of these women.
And as if to confirm her point, I stumble upon a newly dug grave for a former laundry worker due to be buried the next day. Like these women, she went from working in the laundry to living in the convent. Another example of how the McAleese inquiry was less than thorough with the figures. They counted as workers in the Magdalene Laundries only those who were there when they shut down, forgetting that hundreds had become so institutionalized that they never left. They were there still under the care of the nuns when they died. I wanted to talk to the nuns about this and other matters. I asked the 4 main orders involved about the allegations made by Mary and other women, but they all refused to be interviewed. So Mary and I called on the headquarters of the Sisters of Our Lady of Charity in Dublin, where an administrator came to the gate.
Good morning.
Hi, how are you?
Good morning. My name is Sue Lloyd-Roberts. I'm here from the BBC, and this is Mary Merritt, a former Magdalene Laundry worker.
You've already sent in a request, and I think you've got your answer to that request.
Which is no. We have been refused an interview, but we still have some very important questions to ask.
All I wanted was, please, somebody to give me an apology for what happened to me.
No,
That's all I wanted.
Have you been in touch with our PR people?
We've been in touch with your PR people.
Because
we've been in touch
this is not my job. No. My job is not PR.
Okay.
We were clearly not going to be invited in.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Mary and other survivors are getting compensation from the government for time served in the Magdalene Laundries, but they feel betrayed by the report. Senator McAleese turned down my request for an interview. However, the government has apologised, and I was invited to meet Ireland's Deputy Prime Minister, who was herself born to a single mother and put up for adoption by the nuns. Her mother died before she managed to find her.
You know, I recall sitting in kitchens in rural areas of Ireland and women crying and just saying to me, and they had known my birth mother, my birth father, and saying, but things were so different then, it was just so difficult, it was impossible.
When I speak to these women, what they want is the truth to be told.
Well, we now have underway the process for preparing a full judicial report by a very experienced judge who has been involved in a number...
So you admit the McAleese inquiry was less than thorough?
Well, the McAleese inquiry was an inquiry at a point in time. I think the critical thing that it achieved was recognition for what women had experienced and what women had gone through.
But the women themselves say it didn't, because, for example, the glossing over of the abuse, the duration of stay...
Well, I would have met personally a huge number of women through my own personal knowledge. And I do know that what is important for a lot of the women is that they would receive a redress payment. And as I said, that's to me is one of the critical things to happen.
The cost of paying compensation, or redress as it's called in Ireland, is expected to run into tens of millions of euros. But those responsible for running the laundries, the nuns, are not being asked to pay. Not only were they making money from the laundries, but after they closed, the nuns made even more from property sales. They now have assets estimated at over €1.5 billion. What about the nuns? They have the money. Why aren't they made to pay?
Over the years, property has been forthcoming, but nothing like the amounts of funding and compensation and partaking in the redress scheme to the tune that we would like.
So
but
you
that's
will be
a continuing
more.
Conversation. That's a continuing conversation, yes.
That's you when you were a baby.
Oh.
When they took you away from me.
After Mary was raped, she gave birth to a daughter, Carmel.
Yes, I did, yeah.
The baby was taken by the nuns and put up for adoption, and Mary was sent back to work in the laundry. For 40 years, she only had a photo.
You have to keep them forever now.
Oh, I will.
Never let
Oh,
them go.
I'll treasure them.
Yeah.
I will treasure them. They will go into frames.
Mary now lives in the UK. A few years ago, with the help of British social workers, Carmel found her. Mary is desperate to assure her daughter that she didn't give her away willingly.
Carmel, you don't blame me for anything.
No. Oh, God, no, don't.
I couldn't, it wasn't my fault.
But we're just not ashamed anymore, and that's the end of it. And we are going to speak about it, and we are going to fight back.
No one has ever been prosecuted. The nuns haven't paid up, and they've been reluctant to find the records which could unite survivors of the mother and baby homes with their families. Now these people await an inquiry into their past.
Justice for our mothers and for the babies to see her.
But the indications are that the new government inquiry will not look again at the laundries.
I would love to get to the real truth, but they won't. They won't inquire properly because I know what the government are like.
They cover up. It's the church and state work together.
I want somebody to apologise to me. The nuns, the church, the priests, just somebody to apologise to me before I die.